In the top stories, ECCB offers funding to fight COVID-19, ICJ postpones Guyana versus Venezuela case, and many flock to Florida for spring break despite COVID-19 warnings. Hello and welcome to the ZIZ Midday newscast. Today is Thursday, March 19th, 2020. I am your presenter, Shaira Flanders. Nationally, the Monetary Council of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, or ECCB, has approved grant funding of EC $4 million, that's EC $500,000 each, to ECCB member governments to help in their fight against the novel coronavirus, or COVID-19. On the 11th of March, the World Health Organization, or WHO, declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. According to a statement from the bank, the ECCB is fully aware of the potential economic, financial, and social impact of COVID-19 on member countries. Half of the grant was dispersed on 13th March to purchase testing and other critical equipment to detect, contain, and manage COVID-19. The remainder will be used to purchase equipment and supplies such as ventilators and drugs through the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Pharmaceutical Procurement Service, or OECS PPS, a bulk procurement mechanism. In commenting on the decision, the chairman of the Monetary Council, Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance for Grenada, noted, quote, "We are facing an unprecedented situation with the COVID-19 pandemic. Our countries are very appreciative of this thoughtful and practical gesture by the bank," end quote. In other news, Premier of Nevis Honorable Mark Brantley says visits to the seniors in care facilities has been restricted to immediate family and caregivers to ensure that elders are protected from the rapidly spreading coronavirus. He was at the time delivering remarks during an address to update residents and citizens on Nevis about the measures in place to combat the spread of the virus pending a potential outbreak.
Inasmuch as seniors appear most susceptible to the worst impact of COVID-19, I have asked that with immediate effect, large gatherings of our senior groups be suspended and that visits to the Flamboyant Home and to the St. George's Anglican Home be restricted to immediate family or primary caregiver only.
Mr. Brantley also announced that church and religious group visits to the sick in hospital is also discouraged to protect those persons with pre-existing ailments.
The COVID-19 virus appears to attack persons who are already sick with potentially disastrous consequences. I am well aware of the wonderful practice of our churches and religious groups to visit our hospital on Sundays to bring songs and prayers to the patients there. I accordingly crave the understanding of our church and religious community in temporarily suspending such group visits. I ask them, nevertheless, to offer their prayers for our sick and infirm, as indeed I ask them to pray for all of Nevis.
The Premier said that he has instructed the Ministry of Social Development and the Seniors Division to coordinate with the Ministry of Health to, quote, "ensure that all seniors and persons with underlying high-risk conditions across the island are visited and provided with accurate information," end quote. He also said that regular visits are necessary to monitor shut-ins or seniors living on their own. And here's some information for nationals who are planning to travel to Barbados for visa appointments. Effective March 18, 2020, the U.S. Embassy in Bridgetown has suspended routine visa appointments. A release from the embassy on Wednesday afternoon said, quote, "The general public is asked to note that in an effort to minimize exposure to the evolving worldwide pandemic COVID-19, the U.S. Embassy will limit visa processing, both immigrant and non-immigrant, to cases that do not require personal appearances, such as government and diplomatic visas and categories already entitled to visa interview waivers. The consular section of the U.S. Embassy will also consider emergency requests on a case-by-case basis. And moving on to news on the regional scene, the International Court of Justice postponed Guyana versus Venezuela case indefinitely due to fears over the spread of the coronavirus. The case was scheduled to be heard on March 23, 2020, but remains suspended until further notice.
The International Court of Justice was set to hear the case that was meant to solve Guyana-Venezuela border controversy. However, that date has been postponed amidst fear of the COVID-19 global pandemic. A release from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated, quote, in the case concerning the arbitral award of 3rd October 1899, Guyana versus Venezuela, the International Court of Justice has informed Guyana that the oral proceeding scheduled to begin on March 23, 2020, has been postponed due to the current worldwide health crisis. The court has further informed that it will give a decision on a new date in due time. According to the Ministry of Public Health, Guyana has recorded 4 active cases of the virus locally. As of Monday, March 16, Venezuela recorded 33 cases of the virus. Meanwhile, Holland, the nation that houses the ICJ, has been badly struck by the pandemic, with a national death toll of 43 as of Monday. The first round of oral arguments was originally scheduled to be held on March 23, 2020. Guyana would have been presenting its case that day. Venezuela was to speak the following day. The case is expected to take place over the course of several sessions. Nevertheless, the new date for the case has yet to be announced. For Channel 2 Headline News, Esther Sobers.
In keeping with measures to slow down the spread of COVID-19 by limiting social interaction, the Royal St. Lucia Police Force is banning all gatherings of more than 10 people as of Friday, March 20th. Here's more.
Initial numbers of a mass crowd gathering centered around 50 persons or more. However, in a press conference held at the GIS studios, Acting Commissioner of Police Milton Daisy says, for the purpose of controlling the spread of COVID-19, an assemblage of 10 or more people is defined as a mass crowd event. The commissioner was questioned about establishments like bars with daily heavy foot traffic and what control measures, if any, would these entities need to implement to control the flow of people who patronize their business.
The onus would be on the operators of those bars to ensure that, as we said before, no more than 10 individuals are in those bars. And I know there are bars that has very little space. Even that they can control. But the aim, as I said, is for that contact so that persons do not have this contact with the persons, the shared space, and this is what we are working towards.
As for the upcoming horse race, scheduled for March 22nd, Daisy says there will be no exceptions to the rule.
The horse racing event, we know that it was scheduled. Will it be cancelled?
Yes, that it is a mass crowd event, and from all indications, mass crowd events are cancelled.
And to would-be criminal elements, the acting commissioner had a stern warning.
In as much as we have policing the COVID-19, we also have our police officers that would be at the criminals and to ensure that acts of criminality will not be tolerated. Persons would be penalized, persons would be brought in if any acts of criminality is suspected.
To individuals who contravene the newly stipulated restrictions, Daisy says the criminal code makes provisions for enforcement.
Section 550, it deals with permits to operate business places, and the penalty for that is $1,000 or 6 months imprisonment. Also for the gathering in crowd, it is if the police have asked to disperse of the crowd and then persons have failed to do it, it is a fine of $1,000 or 6 months imprisonment. However, we would not like it to reach that far. We are just asking persons to please, and it is for the country, for the betterment of everybody, that they should comply with that requirement.
In closing, the acting commissioner affirms that the men and women of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force stand ready to handle any eventuality in response to COVID-19. Solange Alfred, HTS News Force.
On the international scene, crowds of university students in the United States are celebrating spring break by heading to Florida despite dire health warnings over the new coronavirus. Al Jazeera's Andy Gallagher reports from Miami.
It's a dream destination for millions of tourists and one of Florida's largest employers. Now the streets, rides and car parks of Disney World in Orlando are deserted. The company's now putting its resources behind food distribution, but in other parts of the state it's a different story. In Miami, university students on their spring break are blatantly ignoring warnings about gathering in large crowds. The governor of Florida has told them to knock it off, but many seem unconcerned about the health risks.
We need a refund. This virus ain't that serious. It's more serious things out there like hunger and poverty, and we need to address that.
What is there to do here other than go to the bars or the beach, and they're closing all of it? It's really messing. I think they're blowing it way out of proportion.
On Florida's west coast too, tourists and locals appear blissfully ignorant of the dangers of the pandemic. The Jordan family, visiting from Tennessee, wrongly believe the whole crisis is a hoax.
There's a lot more people die from the flu and a lot more people die from swine flu than any coronavirus probably will ever kill. Everybody's going to get it eventually. It's a viral infection.
Parts of Miami Beach are now closed, but stiffer measures may be needed. It's hard to believe this far into the crisis there are some that appear unconcerned with the pandemic. While the young are less at risk, they're not exempt. They may not get critically ill, but they could also be carriers for the more vulnerable. Florida thrives on tourism, but the crowds we're seeing here aren't helping. Even President Trump, who until a few days ago was playing down the risks, says young people are taking irresponsible chances.
We don't want them gathering, and I see they do gather, including on beaches and including in restaurants, young people. They don't realize that they're feeling invincible. I don't know if you felt invincible when you were very young, but they were feeling totally invincible or are feeling that way, but they don't realize that they can be carrying lots of bad things home to grandmother and grandfather and even their parents.
Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has warned people not to gather in groups of more than 10. It's a warning that few here seem to be heeding. Andy Gallagher, Al Jazeera, Miami, Florida.
Governments globally are enacting strict measures to contain the coronavirus, raising questions about individual freedoms and privacy rights during a pandemic. Here's more.
Well, governments globally are enacting strict measures to contain the coronavirus, raising questions about individual freedoms and privacy rights during a pandemic. Israel has given its security agencies the power to track the mobile data of people suspected of having the virus. The government will use the information to force them into quarantine and warn those who've come into contact with them. South Korea has taken similar steps by using mobile phone and satellite technology to track potential carriers. Ali Funk is a researcher for the watchdog Freedom House. She says strict measures must be put in place to ensure people's privacy isn't at risk once the pandemic is over.
We know from a public health perspective, it can be beneficial to track infected or potentially infected people. But what we're really concerned about is that this location tracking, the health-related information is going to be used for other purposes, particularly by governments who are using surveillance to track down activists or human rights defenders or journalists or even opposition figures. So if this information has to be collected, which I think in order to justify the collection, we have to ensure that it is scientifically supported as a way to protect public health. We need to ensure that the restrictions are as narrow as possible. So then when we get out of this, our privacy protections are still there, because what's happening is these current restrictions could have a lasting effect way long after we get the outbreak under control. It's going to be a big challenge, and it's something that we see post, terrorist attacks or other type of crises. And that's why it's very important for tech companies who are making these tools, for civil society groups, ordinary citizens, to really understand what type of limitations are happening now, so that once we get past this really scary time, we can fight again to have our privacy rights back to us, and free expression and freedom of association and assembly.
And now for the weather. Present weather is cloudy with showers in the vicinity. A gentle breeze of 12 miles per hour is blowing from the north. Today's temperature will peak at 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Expect partly cloudy skies with a low chance of showers today and a moderate chance of showers tonight. Sunset today will be at 6:22 p.m. and the sun is expected to rise tomorrow at 6:15 a.m. And that brings us to the end of the ZIZ Midday Newscast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your presenter, Shaira Flanders. Have a good one.